Time is 6:34, and I call the meeting to order. The purpose of this meeting is for the planning board to receive input, either pro or con, concerning the proposed zoning amendments that were put forth by the public. There will be no debate tonight. It will be those speaking in favor and those against, but no debate between the planning board and the public. This is just for input from the public only. There will be no disrespectfulness, no talking out of order. No ill behavior will be tolerated at all. If there is, you'll be asked to leave by the chairman. If you don't leave on your own, you will be escorted out by an officer. As of the validity of this meeting and why we're here today, per public notification, RSA 675, semicolon 4-2, was challenged at the 1/17/13 meeting, January 17th meeting. We do have town council here, John Radican, and he will speak to this before we get started.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the public. I understand a question arose as to why, with certain petition warrant articles haven't been submitted between the November and December timeframe when they were required to be submitted, why the board didn't have its scheduled meeting until January on these articles. And I'll say by comparison, I represent and work with a lot of municipal planning boards around the state. The time period for municipalities to receive petition warrant articles is a 30-day window that usually starts in November and ends in early December. But then the planning board ordinarily, because of the holidays and all those things, they usually don't get to doing their work until January. And it's always a rush and a hustle to try to get the public hearing notice posted and scheduled for a January meeting. Sometimes boards will have enough time to do 2 public hearings in case they find that they want to make changes to their own proposed amendments to the warrant articles. But of course, petition warrant articles can't be amended by the board or by the meeting. So it's ordinary that it's a date usually in January, usually the 2nd or 3rd week, that planning boards conduct a single public hearing on both petition and on their own amendments that they may be presenting to the town meeting vote in March. So this is pretty ordinary stuff. There's usually only 1 public hearing that's conducted every year. I think if you went back in your records, you'd find that you have a single public hearing that's held by this board in January, most years over the span of a decade. Once in a while, you might have a second public hearing if some amendments require a substantive change and you want to be able to address that in a separate public hearing. So anyway, I don't think there's anything extraordinary about this. The statutes that set forth the time frames for when the board must do so are really not very they're not very demanding in the sense that there's only a couple of them. There is a statute for petition warrant articles that simply says that they must be submitted 100 to 90 days prior to the town meeting. You then have to have a public hearing that's pursuant to RSA 675(7). That requires 12 clear day notice, published in newspapers, posted in 2 public places in order to be effective. But it doesn't tell you, other than that, when that public hearing has to be held. And then there is a requirement that the official copies of the final form of any amendments have to be made available and put on file in the town in the town planning office, or no later than the 5th Tuesday prior to the vote. And then, of course, you have to have that same RSA 6757 notice on any amendments that the board may be presenting. So the two bookends really are the public petition process starts in November and has to get concluded in 30 days. And then the back end of the process is the 5th Tuesday before town meeting vote. And then in between there, the board has a fair amount of latitude as to when to schedule a meeting, although as a practical purpose, they generally never get scheduled to January. And it's unusual in my experience for boards to do a separate set of public hearings on petitions and a separate set of public hearings on its own amendments, because really what you try to do is only ask the public to come out one night, because it's inconvenient lots of times for people to get babysitters or to rearrange their schedules to come out. And so most boards like to do all of their zoning amendments in a single evening, and that's by nature is going to be in January and not in the time frame when petition warrant articles are received in November, December. So what you've scheduled meets those requirements, and from my point of view, it's how other boards work for scheduling these things across the state of New Hampshire. Thanks.
Thank you. With that, we'll do the roll call of members. We have Mike Ahern, Chair, John Ranlett, Vice Chair, Pat Roach, Paul Wilson, John Kelly, Dick Lewis, representing the Board of Selectmen. And that is that. Moving on to item number 3. We have a section for general public comments, and this is a time to talk about or bring up something that is not on the agenda tonight. Yes.
Dave Kemp, resident of Plymouth. I would like to take the opportunity to have the board note on its record that, according to 675-4, the statute to which council has referred, that the board failed to meet its statutory obligation in properly noticing this meeting. The statute's mandatory that at the first meeting, after the petitioned articles are filed, they will set a date for the hearing. That meeting was canceled, according to members, for lack of business to conduct. And the state mandates that you'll meet. I agree with town council, they could set the meeting where you choose. But as he has already stated, and I agree with him, that meeting could have been held the second week in January. Had it been held the second week in January, we may have had different circumstances in the community. Also, on the warning that actually took place, you've combined 2 petitioned articles in one notice, and I'm not sure it's clear to everybody, and we'll try to do the best we can to explain what those petitioned articles mean when that time of the meeting comes. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Okay. That brings us to item number 4. We have 3 petitioned warrant articles. We will go through each one of them individually, opening up a separate hearing for each item. We will then give 3 minutes for those wishing to speak in favor and against, and then we will close the public hearing and open a second public hearing and then on to a third. So that brings us to item A. It was received on November 15th, 2012, concerning section 710.1. And this is to add verbiage directly referencing the master plan in section 710 environmentally sensitive zone of the Plymouth zoning ordinance. And do we want to read?
Right, yeah.
Okay. And it reads, consistent with the purpose of the master plan.
Excuse me, I would just mention that the italics, which you're reading, and then stop, is what is to be added.
Okay.
So it's clear.
So the part that is in italics, which I will read and then stop, is what is the change. Consistent with the purpose of the master plan to preserve natural resources and aesthetic features of our environment. And the rest is already part of 710.1. It is hereby established that an environmentally sensitive zone be created to handle all land include all land within 500 feet as measured horizontally from the edge of the normal river channels of the Baker and Pemmichewasset rivers in the mean high water line of Loon Lake. So I will now entertain anyone who would like to speak in favor of this change to our zoning ordinance.
This is Plymouth residents,
Yes.
landowners.
So if you would like to speak, we ask you to stand up. You can come to the podium if you'd like, state your name, and obviously you should be a resident of Plymouth
Or landowner.
or a landowner.
David Kent, and I would like to speak in favor of this amendment to the zoning ordinance. As we all know, the master plan serves as the foundation for zoning, where it reflects what the people in the town want to have their town be in the future and what it is currently. I'll quote from the plan. Our vision for Plymouth is recognized as the best small towns in America is to achieve responsible growth and community prosperity while preserving the rural characteristics and other qualities that our residents and visitors enjoy. In order to make sure that people understand the basis of the environmentally sensitive zone, I'd like to take a moment, if I can, with your permission, to explain how we got to the situation that we are in with petitioned articles. May I do that?
Sure, you've got 3 minutes.
Okay. We, back in 1988, by ballot, approved the environmentally sensitive zone and lived with it for some 25 years. Along the way, we had a development problem, which everybody in town is familiar with, called the Lowe's development, which caused a challenge to our zoning ordinance. As a result of that, the case wound its way up to the Supreme Court, and in the Supreme Court, they found that there's a word in that ordinance, and the word was incidental, which, to my way of thinking, was clear, but to their way of thinking, they had a different mind, which I guess is why they're called the Supreme Court. As a result, the protections that were offered by the environmentally sensitive zone in terms of what you could do and you couldn't do were basically overturned by the Supreme Court, only because of that word. And what the petition articles here tonight seek to do is to simply put back what was taken from us by the Supreme Court. It seeks to do no more, no less than what the Supreme Court has already, what we originally intended to do in 1988. We think it's consistent with the master plan. There's a lot of language in the master plan that talks about the rural character and the fact that we enjoy our environment here in Plymouth, and that's why these petition articles are there. We would like to have it spelled out at the beginning of the environmentally sensitive zone that one must reflect on the master plan when considering the environmentally sensitive zone. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Just a comment that generally applies to the hearing here.
Yes.
I'd ask the speakers to speak into the microphone and to speak a little loud so the people in the back of the room can hear and the people at home can discern what's being said.
I'd be glad to get up and repeat it all over again.
That's all right. Good job. Anybody else would like to speak in favor of the proposed amendment? Yes.
This is a treat. I'm Mary Crowley, and I'm a resident, and I'm speaking to the planning board. And I'm speaking in support of the amendment to tie the aims of the master plan to considerations for any applications to work within the environmentally sensitive zone. Because our master plan, when it talks about the environment, talks about it in a context that walks hand in hand with economic development. And I worry that often we tend to frame our thinking in terms of we can have environment or we can have economic development. The master plan, if it's if it's referred to carefully. I've read it several times this week. And I've read the zoning ordinances in relation to it several times this week. And what I see is a document that encourages economic growth, a process that was pretty painstaking and involved thoughtful, deliberate energy and inquiry by many citizens in this town to discover what are the goals economically, how can we best supplement our tax base, and what are the goals environmentally? How do we make sure that the environment complements our economic goals? And sometimes when you preserve the environment, you protect land or buildings or parts of town that are just perfect for economic development. And our master plan really helps us understand that. It's very clear about low, medium, and high impact development, where that development should occur to best benefit the town. And then it talks about other lands that would be best preserved, not because they're a nice place to walk, not because it's a good view, but because certain lands perform certain functions. So I think it's fairly important that whenever we look at the master plan is not a legally binding document. However, our legally binding documents refer to it pretty repeatedly, but they don't refer to it directly in this section, and I think that it would be good if the zoning ordinance did. So that's my pitch. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the proposed amendment? Yes.
My name is Quentin Blaine. I'm a resident of Plymouth, and I speak in favor of it because I think that tying the environmentally sensitive zone to the master plan is good. I agree with Mary that it's good for economic development. I think it does a lot to protect our town, and our master plan is really our vision of long-range goals for the town of Plymouth. And I think the environmentally sensitive zone is designed to protect our future. It protects both the water, it can have some impact to protect the water quality for the town and to protect other properties along the shoreline and low-lying properties. So I think it's important to tie the two because I think it's important for our future as a town and our vision of our future as a town.
Anyone else to speak in favor? Okay, we will move to those who would like to speak against the proposed zoning amendment. Yes.
Bill Hoole. As a member of the planning board in years past, I was party to several revisions to our planning board regulations and zoning amendments as it applied to the zoning regulations. Those revisions that were made over the last 15 to 20 years have never seen fit in any of the discussions that we've held regarding changes that the provisions as incorporated into the regulations back in 1988 weren't serving the best interest of the town from both an environmental and an economic development perspective. If we look at the history of the development as it has occurred along Tenny Mountain Highway and what proposals have come forward where they have had impact on the floodplains and or the floodways, those provisions in our regulations have adequately guided our zoning board and our planning board in doing the right things as it related to various applicants' intent for projects within this region. It is the section of Plymouth which is designated as an economic development area, other areas of which are woefully inadequate to meet economic development needs of this community. When you begin to try and further impose restrictive measures beyond those that are already within our regulations. This town is in dire need of good commercial enterprise that we can attract to this community, to lighten the burden of taxation that our residents bear, given the number of nonprofit institutions that do not contribute to our tax base, yet derive all the services that the town has to offer to them. And if this effort to further restrain development along Tenny Mountain Highway by trying to put additional measures and limitations on what is already provided for would only serve to impact the few residents that have long resided in this community
Mr. Houle.
that can ill afford additional taxation.
Thank you, Mr. Houle. Would anybody else like to speak against the proposed amendment?
My name's Paul Sansucci, for the record. As I heard the speakers before me talk about the master plan, they talk about it like it's sacrosanct. It is a guide document. It is not a document that we have to strictly adhere to every minute of every day. It is a guideline for where the town, at a particular point in time, perceives it wants to go. Now, that document was first started in 1988, and it's had many, many revisions over time. This whole situation came about because somebody wanted to build a piece of, build something down there in off of 25 that some people just didn't want to have it built there. It went to the Supreme Court. We all know the preliminary to how it got there. The Supreme Court said it was fine. Build it. It has had numerous engineering studies. I mean, it's been studied probably more than any piece of land in this town. Now, if you keep up with the technology and understand the technology of today, you realize that it is a safe project that most people are asking to build along there. The technology can do it. The Supreme Court says we can do it. So I don't see why we're trying to change this. As Mr. Houle just said before me, we need revenue in this town. We need it desperately. And I would really like to see that whole corridor developed in a reasonable manner, obviously going to the planning board as they should, and making sure that they're following the guidelines. But right now, changing in the middle of the stream doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Thank you.
Anyone else who would like to speak against the proposed zoning amendment? Yes.
I'm Paul Reinhardt. I am not a resident, but I am a landowner. If this amendment passes, it's going to severely restrict any further development on Tenny Mountain Highway. Where else is this town going to expand? I mean, the taxes go up every year. We need to broaden the tax base. And I would strongly urge the board, the selectmen, and all the town employees to oppose this amendment because it's going to cripple the town. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to speak against the proposed? Yes. Then,
Hi, Donald Stope. I'm a landowner on Tenny Mountain Highway, and in some ways it would be in my better interest for, since I'm not that affected on my land, for this to go through. But I believe that people shouldn't have their rights taken away from them on land. I think it's very important that if you own something, that the government doesn't take it away from you. I think the town's done a great job on writing up a master plan and establishing where they think businesses should be growing in Plymouth, and they've designated Tenny Mountain Highway as that area. I don't see this as being something that people are trying to grow into a residential neighborhood. I see this as being the planned expansion for Plymouth. And I think the good of the many is to allow Tenny Mountain Highway to be our commercial district and to expand that way. Like say, this doesn't help me. If anything, it could hurt me here, but I'm still in favor of it, because if my rights were taken away, I'd be very upset. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Frank Miller, and I oppose the article in the fact it's the wording and the fact that no other section in our zoning ordinance contains a preamble from the master plan, and no wording in our existing environmentally sensitive zone ordinance. No wording of this article improves upon the existing ordinance as we have it written already.
Thank you. Anyone else against the proposed zoning? Seeing none, then I will close this public hearing. Opened it at 6:38 and closed it at 7 o'clock. And now,
You need to, excuse me 1 second. This is the order I have them coming in.
yes,
So you'll follow. I think it's appropriate to read the whole thing, but the ESC exists in other parts of our bylaws. This applies only to exactly what it
Okay.
says. So.
under item 4 on our agenda B, we do want to make it aware that the proposed zoning amendment is only 710.4E, refers to only Tenny Mountain Highway, even though there are other parts, the Baker and the Pemmichewasset and Loon Mountain, that also exist within the town. This is in Loon Lake. This is a certain section. Notwithstanding the above, within the environmentally sensitive zone, as it overlays land on the north and south sides of the Baker River between the Rumney Town line and its confluence with the Pemmichewasset River. No earth may be placed in or removed from the environmentally sensitive zone for construction to satisfy construction-related requirements or for other activities outside of the environmentally sensitive zone. Item 2, no earth may be removed from the environmentally sensitive zone to compensate for lost floodplain due to construction or any other activity outside of the environmentally sensitive zone. And it looks like, am I wrong? This as well as this is adding? Or is this already? I can't see the italics versus.
Oh, there's no italics. This
Okay.
in its entirety is a new section.
The whole part that I read is a brand-new section, and we open up the public hearing at 7:02. So those that would like to speak in favor of the proposed zoning amendment, yes.
Thank you. Again, my name is Quentin Blaine. I'm a resident of Plymouth, and I speak in favor of this amendment. I look at this amendment not as creating anything new, not as adding some new restriction, but really restoring what the proponents of the ESZ thought they had created when the amendment passed in 1988. And that was before the Supreme Court decided that the words as stated didn't mean what a lot of folks in town who helped begin the push for the ESZ thought it did. That has been in place for 25 years. It doesn't add new restrictions to the town. It's something that's been in, the ESZ has been in the zoning ordinance for 25 years. And what it basically says is that if you can accomplish the whole result in the ESZ, you can do that, but you can't use the, you can't exploit the ESZ for construction in other areas. And there's good reason to protect the environmentally sensitive zone, I think. There's many good reasons. A couple of them that come to mind are the, it protects property owners downstream. It protects the value of property in this town, and it protects our water supply as well. And it protects value of property by creating a couple of ways. One is it has a mitigating effect when we have large water events, like the Storm Irene, which wasn't a flood in this area, but that same storm wreaked havoc in Vermont. And the upstream of the Baker River, there's a lot of water that's coming through, and when it comes through, it doesn't have a clear path all the way down to the ocean. In different places, it has to slow down, and this is the ESZ is one of those buffer areas that allows the water to slow down. Every time we have a large water event, the river moves. It'll move. It'll create oxbows. It'll do different things, but it won't be in the same place. It will move materials. It'll pile them elsewhere. It will carve out areas along the shoreline, and the more that's moving and the faster that it's moving, the more change is going to happen downstream. Now, you may be on the receiving side. You may end up with another half acre on your property, or you may be on the losing side, and you may lose a half acre of your property if the faster stream carves out a bigger piece of it. But it slows down the movement of the stream, and so it slows down the changes that are wrought by any major water event. The second thing is that it has an impact on our water quality downstream, and that our biggest aquifer is that, as my understanding is that we're near the confluence of the Pemmy and the Baker. And protecting our water is a scarce resource in this world, going to be getting scarcer. Am I all done? My 3 minutes? Okay, thank you. Maybe somebody else can pick it up.
Would anybody else like to speak in favor of the proposed zoning amendment? Yes.
Hi, my name is Gunnar Baldwin. I'm a Plymouth resident. And I'm speaking in favor of this amendment because I want to draw attention to the fact that the Baker River corridor is a living system. You can't look at what you do on the Baker River system in a patchwork, property by property, case by case basis. In the ESC, what you do on your property doesn't only affect your property, it affects the whole system. Water gets displaced. When you move large amounts of fill or you add fill, you create dynamics that nobody can understand. The engineering is just not that good. Somebody earlier said the science is good, the engineering is good. Looking at what's happened across this country this year, nobody has a good handle on what you do with Mother Nature. There are powerful forces that at work when we get a major storm here, and Plymouth gets more than its fair share of them. You can't engineer around what you don't know. No matter how good an engineer or a scientist or geologist is in this area, nobody can predict the dynamic forces that happen every year in the Baker, and especially not when there's a major flood. We've seen all kinds of large storms in the last 10 years, and I think that we can't just look at what's happening on that one site. We have to look at the dynamics of the whole. We need the ESZ as a buffer. We do not understand the big picture. I don't think we ever will. I'd also like to address the fact that this somehow hinders economic growth in this town. First of all, the part of the master plan, the areas that are designated for building in its current form, leave plenty of room for economic development. There's plenty of room on the south side of the highway. I would also urge people to look at what's happened to towns that have gone big time with their development. North Conway, Tilton, they're no better off for their development. Those two towns are recipient towns for this in the state education formula. They have done an enormous amount of sprawl, and they really aren't any better off. And I'd also like to add, if you looked what happened to Walmart after they came, we may have gotten some initial tax breaks, but they have economic muscle, and they can negotiate a better tax deal after the fact. You have to count that in. Finally, I'd like to say that this is a valid exercise of the town's power to promote the health, safety, and welfare of the town. It's not a taking. We are restoring a understanding of what we had before. We're not adding something new. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else in favor of the proposed? Yes.
I'm not a scientist, so I can't really tell you about flooding and soil removal or the like, but I can tell you some things about what's proposed here. This does not prevent anybody from building in the environmentally sensitive zone. All it attempts to do is what the old ordinance attempted to do, which was say, you can't mine in this environmentally sensitive zone and take soil away. You can't take soil from the environmentally sensitive zone to use outside of the environmentally sensitive zone. And the reciprocal is true too. You can't fill in the environmentally sensitive zone. But if you want to dig a hole, you want to put in a foundation, spread that dirt around where it is, you can build in the environmentally sensitive zone. Anywhere along where that zone runs. It doesn't prohibit anybody's rights from being taken from them. There is no taking here. You've got a right to do what you want to do. But just as consistent with a master plan which says we will pay attention to, and I'll quote, appropriate safeguards that are compatible with private residences and environmentally sensitive areas. This is an appropriate kind of measure to protect an environmentally sensitive area. Furthermore, to pick up where a former speaker mentioned the water quality, he's not talking about whether the fish in the river. What he's talking about is the water that we drink. It comes from the end of the Baker River where it meets the confluence of the Pemigewasset. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Yes.
My name is Carolyn Kent. Most people know me as Widge. But for the record, I'm Carolyn. Just a quick thing. I wanted to show you this map that we have. Is that the camera there? Have I got it in a good place?
No. No. Towards from where you're pointing.
And she's speaking to the board, so.
Yeah. Well, I want the board to see it, but I also would like the camera to see it.
Yeah, that's better
That's
now.
good.
Okay. All I want to show you is how the Baker River has changed over the eons that it's been meandering its way through Plymouth. It's a little hard to see, but there are all these oxbows that show where the river has gone at one period of time. Where the river is today isn't necessarily where the river will be in the future. And we need to keep that in mind as we plan for that area. And that's why we have the environmentally sensitive zone, is because it allows for the change that the river will do on its own. It's in its natural state. And we don't want to impede what it's going to do on its natural state, because that's in the best interest of the town and the river.
Anyone else wishing to speak in favor? Yes.
Excuse me, I'm Mary Ann McGarry, and I teach environmental science and policy at the university. And I do a river unit that I've done for the last 8 years. And there's
Can you state whether you're a resident of Plymouth?
Yes, I am a resident of Plymouth, sorry.
Sorry.
And the points that I want to make are, I support everything I've just heard, and I'm really impressed that so many Plymouth residents are so well informed about science. But when we had the big flood in 2011, one of the things we covered in my class this fall was that the Mississippi River, and there's a lot more at stake economically with the Mississippi River, they are moving all of their levees back because they're recognizing like it's been said, you can't engineer solutions, and they're finally getting that, and they're moving people back. They're not letting them rebuild. And the other point is that when you have a big flood like that, even that big one in 2011, if you just look at that, the 100-year flood, the 500-year flood records, all of that's based on historical data. So any new data that you get becomes part of the record, and what was a 100-year flood suddenly changes. When you add more impervious surface, which is what I heard with all of those very detailed additional build-out plans from last Thursday, really had me concerned, because that was the first I heard about it, because that's a lot more roofs, it's a lot more imperviousness. When you add more imperviousness, then you have the water moves faster, you have more frequent flooding, more intense flooding. You change the whole dynamic of the river when you develop in a watershed, and that's one of the basic fundamental concepts that I teach my students, that we do that exercise. And so if we don't protect this environmentally sensitive zone, then I'll have a perfect case study of what not to do with my students, and I hate to have it in my own town of Plymouth.
Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the proposed zoning amendment? Yes.
I too have a large picture. I'm still Mary Crowley, and I still live here. And this is my picture for you guys. It's a picture of a field on Tenny Mountain Highway taken from the side of the road on August 29th, 2011. And how do I make it so the camera can see it?
Or behind you.
Put it like so?
That works.
I promise to be civil, orderly, and respectful. Can I use the easel? Well,
Cant it a little
That
back
way.
towards you, Mary.
like that? Well, I don't think I have to hold it the whole time. I'm not Vanna White. This is a picture of a field. This is not the river. It looks like the river, but it isn't the river. Although it is the river, that's my point. When rivers flood, the lands next to them actually become part of the river, sort of the way when a tide comes up, the beach becomes part of the ocean, and then the tide goes down. When these rivers rise, with the increasingly frequent flooding events that we're experiencing, not just in Plymouth, I mean, we're all aware of what's been happening nationally in that regard. I don't think I have to hold that the whole time. So here's my point. I'm talking, but I'm one of 29 people who put in this petition. So I like to think that this is more than just my idea or my thought or my particular point of view. I support the ESC because it plays an important environmental function to protect physical property that is essential to good economic development. I'm not going to hammer the master plan, but it is very specific about citing development, high-impact development on the south side of Tenny Mountain, west of Claybrook, which, just to give you a sense of context, is exactly west of the lot where the Riverside Landing Shopping Center is going to be. The shopping center is precisely east of the area that is recommended. And the reason for that is because it tends to fill up with water like this. And there's good engineering in the world, and I know there is. But good land use is good economic development. That's my point. In times when we get high snow melt and a lot of rain, that water needs to move to the Pemigewasset. And here's my little metaphor. You take a funnel and you take a gallon of water. Am I almost out?
Got 25 seconds.
Okay. Water, funnel, pour it on the table, rolls off. Put a towel down, funnel, water, pour it. It goes into the towel. It doesn't go on the floor. There's no mess to clean up. The towel is our environmentally sensitive zone, and we need to protect it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else to speak in favor of the proposed zoning amendment? Seeing none? Yes.
Hi, yes, my name is Maureen Ebner. I am a resident. When we moved here almost 15 years ago, my brother said to me, "Wow, you are so lucky. Those rivers right there, the Pemmy and the Baker, are the most beautiful rivers we have in this state. And he said they're pristine, and I would like to think that we could keep them that way. They're one of our most valuable resources. For so many reasons that you've heard tonight, I just want to speak in favor of this article.
Anyone else in favor? Okay. Those that would like to speak against the proposed zoning? Yes.
First thing I'd like to note is that the proposed 710-4 parentheses E conflicts with the existing provision of the regulation, notably 710-4C and D. So it's not consistent with the existing regulation. The second point that I would like to make is that when Topsfield Development proposed to build a Lowe's and some other stores in the same property that is under consideration for development presently, the most extensive studies were conducted on this particular set of parcels of any studies that's ever been done in this town. Notably among them was a fluvial geological study that was done by a scientist who studied the history of the river, the changes in the river that have occurred over history, and the proposed provisions of the project which address the quality of runoff surface water that would be re-entering the river. His conclusions were that, as has been pointed out, the river is going to continue to shift and change to some degree. The biggest change that has occurred to the river occurred when they built out Tenny Mountain Highway in the late 60s, and early 70s. They changed the routing of the river, but it hasn't been to the detriment of the cleanliness or the beauty of the river. Nor would the excavation that was done up by the Smith Bridge by the state as a volumetric mediation landscape change as a result of the southbound exit that was created on exit 25. That has not in any way affected the water quality of the river and has enhanced the recreational interest of the community in being able to use it for what it is. And it accepts water when the river wants to give up water for floodplain purposes. This river, this scientist, going back to his findings, indicated that with the scrubbers and the cleaning provisions that were included in that project, the water quality entering the river on the surface and that permeating to the underground water volume, whatever is there, would be enhanced by what was proposed by the developer. I urge you as a board to read those studies very carefully in your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Anyone else that would like to speak? Yes.
May I ask a question of Mr. Hall?
No, not a debate. Yes.
Again, Paul Sansucci, resident Plymouth. I would suggest that the people that are at this meeting tonight get a hold of the History of Plymouth book. You can probably buy it across the street at the bookstore. And look at what it was like here in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. And see what it was like when the river was allowed to do what it wanted to do. The entire bridge down there, excuse me, down on 25 there, or on 3 rather, was covered with water. I'm talking about the railroad bridge, the bridge we drive across. I'm talking about Foster Street. I'm talking about the Shank Mill. I'm talking about that whole section before they built out the Tenny Mountain Highway was completely covered many, many times. And believe me, it was a real mess. Now, I didn't live here then, but since I've been here, I've seen what happens when we do have a flood. Yes, the picture that Mary showed everybody, it did happen. It happens occasionally. It used to also go across the road into where the, what is it, the, pardon me? Yeah, right. And other places across there. It went into Laconia Electric, as a matter of fact, and other places. We had a little of it went Laconia Electric the last time. So the management of the river shouldn't be a problem or shouldn't be something we're trying to be really worried about managing it. Yes, we want to be careful with it. I'm not saying we don't want to be careful, but we surely don't want that to impede our growth and development if we can engineer around problems that may occur. Thank you.
Anyone else wanting to speak against the proposed?
The intent of this article is good, but the proposed article as worded would be in effect a technical infeasibility on the existing article, section 710(4), capital C and capital D in our zoning ordinance. In other words, the wording of those 2 sections would make a landowner unable to comply with the sections 710(2) and 3 if the new section 710.4 capital E is in place. The proposed article would in effect cancel sections 708 and 709 of our existing zoning ordinance. The proposed article would have unintended consequences because the wording of the new article would prevent anyone from repairing or restoring any environmental damage done along the 2 rivers that have occurred over the last 100 years. The wording in the article, we would be unable to sand the highways or maintain the public gardens located within the river in the summertime. The proposed article has the appearance of spot zoning and would be taking property rights without compensation. The proposed article does not contain any wording that would improve the already existing environmentally sensitive zone ordinance. I don't believe this article is fair, reasonable, and in the best interest of the people of town of Plymouth.
Thank you. Anyone else that would like to speak against the proposed zoning? Yes, Mr. Stope.
Hi, Donald Stope again. The having only a portion of the river affected by this makes it clear that the purpose isn't for the flooding as much as it is for maintaining the aesthetics of the river. And I agree, it's a beautiful river and it's nice to see it that way, but I don't think we should try to protect it under the false pretenses of the flood mitigation argument. I think that the engineering done to create floodway mitigation can be as good or exceed what nature can do on its own when we look at what we've been able to do to stop the Merrimack and Pemmy River from doing what it's done to towns in the past. We've achieved a lot there. So proper handling of the waterways can be done effectively, but if we're going to do this under the riverway, then why aren't we doing the entire river plain? Why are we just isolating a small part?
Anyone else wishing to speak against the proposed zoning article?
I would. Brian Murphy, Plymouth resident. Actually not speaking against so much as a question or two, rhetorical possibly, and perhaps some observations. One, a good friend of mine who was born in this town told me that when he was a boy, he was not able to swim in the Pemmy because it was so polluted. And it's been quite turned around now. Okay, that's an observation. The question I have is that the oxbows in the Baker River Valley, I believe, and I'm open to education on this, were created prior to the flood control structures that were placed upstream in Wentworth and beyond. It's just my observation. Thank you.
Any others to speak against the proposed zoning?
I have that letter,
Okay,
unless you want to wait till the end.
we'll wait to the end. Okay, so that closes this portion of the public hearing. It is 7:28 and brings us to the third item. Third proposed zoning. We, the undersigned registered voters of the town of Plymouth, request that the following question be included on the 2013 ballot. Are you,
This is an addition.
Okay.
To here is what is there.
so I'm going to read the part that's already existing in 710.1. It is hereby established that an environmentally sensitive zone be created to include all land within 500 feet as measured horizontally from the edge of the normal river channels of the Baker and Pemmonshallott's rivers and the mean high water line of Loon Lake. Then, adding this part, is except that the environmentally sensitive zone shall not extend south of the Tenny Mountain Highway between Yetton Road and Highland Street. So I open the hearing at 7:29 and ask anyone that would like to speak in favor of the proposed zoning amendment to speak now.
I was the first person to sign this particular petition. I'm much in favor of it. And the reason is that there are oxbows in the Baker River, which, if one calculates the environmentally sensitive zone, they flow over to the south side of the Tenny Mountain Highway. Now, the Tenny Mountain Highway, although it's man-made, does create a natural barrier to the river. So it made sense, at least I believe it made sense, that the properties that lie on the south side of the Tenny Mountain Highway ought to be excluded from the environmentally sensitive zone. And if you look at that map over there, I think you can see where one swings significantly down, sort of by below Walmart, I think it is, where that occurs. The people who want to develop those lots, I think, are probably going to have to remove some soil to be able to create a level lot. And if it's in the environmentally sensitive zone, they won't be able to do that. So therefore, I think it's appropriate to protect the value of those lots which already have been subdivided, which ought to be developed. The Department of Environmental Sciences said that we ought to develop the south side of the road. And I'm in strong agreement. I mean, there's good economic potential on the south side of the Tenny Mountain Highway. It's reasonably accessed. The lots are good. That's where Walmart went. That's where Boulder Point went. We can maximize the potential of that land. And I think that the structure of that land could cause difficulty for those lots that are on the south side. And therefore, I strongly urge that you favor this amendment. I think it's a good one.
Thank you. Anyone else that would like to speak in favor? Yes.
I speak in favor of it as well. I think this amendment...
Your name?
My name's Quentin Blaine, and I am a resident of Plymouth. I think it's consistent with our master plan. Unlike a couple of comments that I've heard, this is not an anti-development proposal here tonight, these amendments. It is an appropriate development proposal, and this is one piece of it. And when you take all of the pieces, the south side of Tenny Mountain Highway is, our master plan says that's where we should concentrate development. It's unlikely to have much of an impact on what would be the technical environmentally sensitive zone from one oxbow on the north side of the road. And so I think this is consistent with what allowing appropriate development and will not adversely affect the town or affect the Baker River doing that. So I speak in favor of that as well.
Anyone else to speak in favor? Yes.
Mary Ann McGarry again, and I am a resident of Plymouth. And I also just want to echo that I don't think this is masquerading as anti-development. I support the development on the south side as well. You know, I said environmental science and policy, and there aren't compromises, but every time we continue to add more imperviousness in the sensitive zone, then we are going to increase the runoff and the frequency of flooding. We are changing the watershed in that area. On the south side, the impact is not as great.
Anyone else to speak in favor? Yes.
Have another picture. But first what I'm going to say is these amendments do not say that you cannot develop on the north side of Tenny Mountain Highway. What they say is, they talk about the master plan and they talk about high-impact development. High-impact development should be thrown to the south side of Tenny Mountain Highway. Having said that, I brought this little picture, which is kind of hard to read, but if anybody wants to look at it afterwards, they can. Because it shows the road in black, the river in blue, the floodway in red, and an unfortunate choice of color yellow for the ESC. And it shows a couple of places where, because of the way the river meanders, small slices of land on the south side of Tenny Mountain Highway would be affected by the ordinances of the ESC. And that's just not reasonable. I mean, you can't say we want it on the north side, but you can't put it there either. But again, to remember that what we're talking about here is high-impact development for the south side of the Tenny Mountain Highway. Nothing precludes further development on the south side. It does preclude massive excavation out of the environmentally sensitive zone to create buildable lots. Now, having said that, I would like to talk about common safeguards that we all accept. If I'm in a big rush and I've got to get somewhere fast, I should not drive 70 miles an hour past the school. It's not a good thing for my community. And when I put out a sign on the sidewalk a few weeks ago and the town asked me to take it in because I had put it out in not in a permitted area, I thought, well, that's fair because that's zoning. I accept zoning. I took it in and I made myself another sign that was permitted. You know, we all accept limitations in our lives every day that serve a common purpose for our community. These amendments take nothing away. They ask us to follow a document that the town has voted on. The town can change that document. If they do, then the planning board may interpret the ESZ consistent with a new master plan. There's a whole beautiful process going on. And I think that what we're talking about tonight is we have a broken ESC. It doesn't have the language to support its intent, and in a way it's like an oxbow. Our current wording for the ESC is an oxbow. It isn't any longer part of the river of law that is going to take care of us all. It's not going to take care of everybody. Somebody's not going to get what they want. That happens in society. Sometimes I don't get what I want. But most of the time, my community provides for me that which I need. These amendments will allow full high-impact development on the south side of Tenny Mountain Highway, medium and low-density development on the north side of Tenny Mountain Highway. They will preclude mountains of dirt being dug out to create lots that don't already exist. They will preserve valuable floodways, and I thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak in favor of the proposed zoning amendment? Seeing none, we will now allow anybody in the public that would like to speak against the proposed zoning amendment.
Bill Hool again, local resident. This little sliver that has been identified on the south side of Tenny Mountain Highway, particularly in the vicinity of the lumber yard and the lot between it and Yetton Road. It's probably ESP because of its 500-foot proximity to the Baker River, true. But that area does flood in and of itself from the brook that comes off Tenny Mountain. Yetton Road goes underwater near Bartlett Road in flooding events or high rainfall events with the water coming off that watershed. And it also collects in the area that's been identified as this ESP on the south side of Tenny Mountain Highway. That's not to say that it shouldn't be treated just like any other piece of property on the north side of Tenny Mountain Highway if and when there is proposed development on that lot. And I happen to know the individual that has recently purchased that lot. I don't even know if he's aware of the fact that ESP does cross his boundaries. Having said that, I think that in this particular case, this ESP change is moot. Sensible planning board, sensible zoning board can handle that within the existing regulation if and when the time comes to have to do so. Regarding all of the proposed petition amendments, I urge this planning board to note on those when they go to the ballot that you do not embrace those changes for the reasons that the existing regulation has served this community very well for 25 years, and the studies that have been done relative to Tenny Mountain Highway and those lands to the north of Tenny Mountain Highway have shown that they are viable development parcels for commercial development purposes. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
It should be noted that if this proposed Article 710 or capital E were to not be included in our existing environmentally sensitive zone ordinance, an applicant coming before the board would have to comply with the federal, state, local laws, rules, regulations, codes, and standards with dealing with construction in an environmentally sensitive zone. In our current sections, in section 708 and 709, which deal with that process, obviously would be in force and be in effect. Rather than try to determine way ahead of time of any applicant trying to come in to put a proposal for construction in the environmentally sensitive zone, I believe that our existing sections, section 10, decimal 4, A through D, works very well, and that having to do a spot zoning that this article addresses to put back into area south of Tenny Mountain Highway as exempt from that environmentally sensitive process looks to be like it has the appearance of a spot zoning. And then the other thought part is, in consideration of that, is that our constructing right now of the Enterprise Center on Main Street, what we did for the town library, anything in the skateboard park area that we've done, Plymouth Insight in the future for redevelopment would not be able to do and comply with the new proposed warrant article. Thank you.
Anybody else wishing to speak against the proposed zoning amendment? Seeing none? Yes, we have a letter from a property owner who owns land within the affected land in question, so I'm going to let Sharon read that into the minutes.
This is a letter I received today, hand-delivered from Susan Fletcher on behalf of she and her brother, J. David Fletcher, who apparently lives in the Midwest. This is regarding parcel ID number 213028 to Sharon Penny, January 21st, 2013. Regarding the effort to ban all building within 500 feet of the Baker River and other waterways in Plymouth, we are definitely against the proposal. We own a 9.8 acre piece of property abutted by the Baker River on the north side of Tenny Mountain Highway. Most of it is considered, this is handwritten, so it's a little hard. Most of it is considered to be in the flood zone. That already poses many restrictions on what can be done with it. We have had this property up for sale for at least 10 years with no truly interested buyers. We are sure that the present restrictions have been a consideration of present buyers. Our asking price is way below the assessed value. If the present proposal comes to pass, it will be virtually impossible to sell. Because of the lot size and the proposed restrictions, it would be impossible to build anything anywhere on it. It has been assessed at such a large value because of its frontage on Tenny Mountain Highway that over the last 8 years we have paid nearly $100,000 in taxes. And just as a reference point, in this particular parcel, it would essentially take the ESC as proposed. Amended change would take essentially 95% of the parcel. So.
I'm going to close the public hearing at 7:44 and bring it back to the board now. We can have discussion on each article. We can, whatever the board would like to do at this point. So we will look at the first proposed zoning amendment that I'm calling 1. Any discussion on this?
Could you remind us which one?
Yes.
Which one that is?
This is the italics, is the first line. Consistent with the purpose of the master plan to preserve natural resources and aesthetic features of our environment. And then goes on to what was already there, part of the environmental sensitive zone. It is hereby established that an environmentally sensitive zone be created to include all land within 500 feet as measured horizontally from the edge of the normal river channels of the Baker and Pemmichewasset rivers and the mean high water line of Loon Lake. Yes.
I don't have a problem with this proposed amendment for this reason. I think if you look at it's section 101 of the existing zoning ordinance, authority and purpose, it talks about the zoning regulations in district are in accordance with the Plymouth master plan and are designed, et cetera, et cetera. One of those exceptions is to preserve the small town atmosphere, attracting natural setting, while protecting areas such as wetland, natural habitats, agricultural land, historic cultural resources, aquifers, and river quality. I mean, I understand what some of the commentators were saying about maybe putting a specific reference in a specific section of the zoning, creating a linkage between the master plan and the language of the ordinance itself, but I think that connection already exists, so I don't really see this as having any kind of a significant impact on anyone's property, and I think it's appropriate language.
Any other discussion? Yes, Mr. Wilson.
Yeah, I'd just say simply that I agree with Mr. Lewis, that I find this to be, frankly, a harmless amendment that is not going to change, will really change nothing with regard to people's ability to use their land or not use their land.
Any other discussion? Yes, Mr. Kelly.
If this is mute and it doesn't change anything, what is the purpose of these amendments? In other words, when you have an amendment or a change, there has to be something that has caused this change. So if the two gentlemen on the board has indicated it's mute or it's not going to change anything, why are we even considering the amendment?
Any other discussion? I have a particular problem with the word preserve. When someone talks about preserving natural resources and aesthetic features, I'm all for that, but if we're talking about someone's private property, and we're talking about preserving their property the way that it is, to me, that could be interpreted as, don't touch it, leave it alone. Let's preserve your land. Unless someone wants to help out with the property taxes, we've got a letter from someone who says in 8 years they paid $100,000 in property taxes. And I'd be a little concerned about that property owner with that word preserve. The other item that that I'm happy to mention is that when the environmentally sensitive zone was established, and I'm not sure exactly what year that was, and I should know, but there was no Shoreland Protection Act, was not did not cover the Baker and Pemmichewasset rivers at that time. And since then, since the environmentally sensitive zone, we have been included into the Shoreland Protection Act. And if there was any question whether there were safeguards along the river, the Shoreland Protection Act did ensure the protection. So, unless there's any other discussion, I'm ready for a vote, and I entertain yes.
I have a comment. According to Mr. Lewis, the comment about reference to master plan is already in the zoning ordinances already, kind of.
Yes.
So here again, it seems like it's kind of a moot point to change it. It's not really, it's already kind of covered, it sounds like.
Okay. You have a motion?
What's the vote?
Motion whether...
The motion needs to be made. The planning board's charge is, because this goes to public ballot, public vote at town meeting, is to whether as a board with a simple majority you recommend or do not recommend passage of this proposed amendment, any of these proposed amendments at town meeting. Because you have all these proposed amendments, and any that you come up with yourselves subsequently will be on a separate ballot. So the motion would be to a motion to, whatever you're feeling, to recommend or not recommend the passage of this.
All right, I'll make a motion that we don't recommend the passage of this amendment, 710.1.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay.
I just, excuse me.
We've got a motion, we've got a second, and now discussion, yes.
Yeah, this is just a clarification. I just wanted to be sure of what I heard, and that was the motion that we do not recommend the passage of this. Was that the motion?
Yes, that is.
Okay.
The planning board does not recommend, yes. Okay. Is everybody ready for a vote? All those in favor of not recommending the passage of this at town meeting signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Nay.
Nay.
Opposed. So it was 3, 4 to 2.
4 to 2.
That brings us to the second proposed zoning amendment.
And once again, could you remind us which one that is?
Okay, so are you in favor of amending section 710-4? And basically, we're adding would be, the proposal is to add 3 paragraphs.
The entire section is new.
Not in its section 710.4E is the new part. Notwithstanding the above, within the environmentally sensitive zone as it overlays land on the north and south sides of the Baker River between the Rumney Town line and its confluence with the Pemmichewasset River. Or 1, no earth may be placed in or removed from the environmentally sensitive zone for construction, to satisfy construction-related requirements, or for other activities outside of the environmentally sensitive zone. And 2, no earth may be removed from environmentally sensitive zone to compensate for lost floodplain due to construction or any other activity outside of the environmentally sensitive zone. Any discussion? Yes, Mr. Wilson.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to the letter that was read into the record recently by a landowner who owns this 9.8 acre parcel along the abutted by the Baker River. First of all, in the first paragraph it says, regarding the effort to ban all building within 500 feet of the Baker River and other waterways, that's not the case. That's not being proposed anything here. And secondly, I think Ms. Penny said that this particular parcel is almost 95% included in the environmentally sensitive zone. Frankly, according to the reading of this proposed amendment, you can move dirt around. You can dig up dirt and you can move dirt inside the environmentally sensitive zone. This proposed change here relates to excavating soil in the environmentally sensitive zone to move it elsewhere, or by taking soil and putting it into the environmentally sensitive zone. And it applies, by the way, only to the Baker River, not to a portion of the Baker River, but to the entire Baker River inside of the Plymouth town limits.
Any other discussion? First, Mr. Lewis.
If this was worded a little bit differently, I think I could be in favor of it. I look at the language under 710.4, proposed 710.4E1, which says no earth may be placed in or removed from. While you may not have a situation where you would be removing earth from the environmentally sensitive zone, I have yet to ever see a construction project for which no dirt is going to have to be brought in. I mean, there's always some kind of, bringing in appropriate material for fill, to create a building pad, whatever. Again, if this was worded a little bit differently, I think I could be supportive of it. I think as it reads to me right now, I think it really is a fairly comprehensive prohibition against any development in the zone. And I think, the Tenny Mountain corridor is just too important for development purposes. I guess if I may just sort of throw out a little bit of a challenge to the audience and to the writers of this amendment, I mean, I think what I would rather see is some kind of effort to strengthen the environmentally sensitive zone in other ways, so that we always are making sure that we put water quality, environmental sensitivity sort of at the forefront of the discussion. Because I think we're fooling ourselves a little bit if we think that because something is on the south side of Tenny Mountain Highway and the water flows into the environmentally sensitive zone, but we don't really do any protective measures on the south side, we're kind of fooling ourselves to think that we're really protecting the environmentally sensitive zone. I mean, as one commentator said, the Baker River is a living system, and it really is a living system. And I think there's probably some people in the audience that would agree with me that when you look at water quality and where water goes and how we treat it and how we manage the development of new impervious surfaces, you got to look at watersheds, not just one particular subset of a watershed. So those are my comments.
Mr. Kelly.
I believe the original intent of this particular section was to eliminate any mining that would create an economic profit to the person that is mining the section that they're working in. It had nothing to do with, as far as building a house or building a structure for it. And what I believe they're trying to do is to eliminate any movement of earth if the person that owns the land does not own sufficient enough land to be able to move its earth back and forth on its own property. I went through those, and it came out that this was not intended as far as the incidental word. It was not and has never been intended as far as ordinary buildings concerned. If you look back in the original regulations, it will say no commercial mining. And that's what they intended not to do, and this has nothing to do with what they're trying to do on those lots.
Any other discussion? I also am again concerned that the environmentally sensitive zone might have been, probably had its reasons for being enacted years ago. There was very little protection probably on the river. It was getting much cleaner than what it was, and someone had mentioned that. I remember as a little boy, it was, you didn't swim in the river. So it got clean on its own. The shoreline protection did provide many safeguards for communities that did not have an environmentally sensitive zone. It's in place now. I think that there are some issues with the environmentally sensitive zone, the way that it's worded. I'm not sure whether it's outlived its usefulness at this point. I'm not quite sure, but if there's a proposal for a vote, I'd entertain it at this point, unless there's more discussion.
I actually have a question of clarification, kind of thinking of what Mr. Lewis said. You're talking about like a building that needs some dirt brought in to do something. If someone wanted to build a house and needed a dirt brought in to build a driveway, they wouldn't be able to do that then if this passed, right?
Correct.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I mean, again, I've never seen any kind of a building project where something has to be brought into the site.
Yeah, and I mean, it's 5 feet from either side of the river, so it's not just one side of the river.
I mean, even for someone, trying to strengthen their floodplain or their riverfront, there's very little that I think gives them for options at this point.
I just wanted to clarify that.
Mr. Wilson?
Yeah, I'm still trying to understand it better. If there were an issue of a driveway, and if the driveway were outside of the environmentally sensitive zone, then there is no issue. Then soil can be brought in because it's outside of the environmentally sensitive zone.
But if it's inside the environmentally sensitive zone?
Yeah, if I could finish. If it's inside the environmentally sensitive zone, this amendment would still allow for the excavation of soil from inside the environmentally sensitive zone to relocate it in an appropriate place so that a driveway could be built or a building pad could be built.
It says no earth may be placed in or removed from the environmentally sensitive zone for construction to satisfy construction-related requirements or for other activities outside.
Outside. Yeah, the key word is outside of the environmentally sensitive zone. So if somebody wants to construct a business or a dwelling inside the environmentally sensitive zone, then they can move soil around inside the environmentally sensitive zone in order to satisfy the construction needs. They could build up a pad, they can excavate to compensate for the building up of a pad, so long as it involves just the movement of the soil inside the environmentally sensitive zone.
But if they needed soil requirements that were not on site, and they needed to bring something else onto the pad other than, that would pretty much prevent. Yes, Mr. Kelly?
I owned an office in the environmental sensitive zone of Baker River. When I reconstructed my office, built it bigger, we found a sinkhole in the driveway. We had to bring in fill from outside, namely pea stone and stuff like that, to fill this sinkhole and make it safe for people to drive in the driveway. Now, under this, I would assume I couldn't have done that.
I think. Yeah. Anyway, any other discussion before we move to a vote? Anybody like to move a motion? Yes, Mr. Wilson.
Yeah, I move that the planning board recommends approval of this zoning ordinance change.
Is there a second?
Will you please clarify? Clarify this?
Yeah, Mr. Wilson would like to put on the table that the planning board approve or recommend approval at town meeting.
Right.
A town vote.
If you say yes, if you vote yes, the amendment will go through. If you vote no.
Well, that the planning board would recommend it.
That's right. I recommend it. So if you vote yes, it says the planning board
supports.
Accepts it, or accepts it. If they say no.
It doesn't have a second yet.
What's that?
It doesn't have a second yet to move forward with the vote. We would need a second.
I'd give a second.
Seeing no second, is there another?
No, I just did. I just seconded it.
Oh, you seconded it. Oh, okay. All right. Any discussion before we vote? Okay, so the vote is on the table that if you say aye, that you are, in essence, saying that you, the planning board would support, would recommend the passage of this amendment, zoning amendment. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay?
Nay.
Do
No
we need-
abstentions? That was 1, 2, 3,
So it was
4,
5 to
5.
1.
Okay.
Do we need another vote, or is that
No,
clear
that's
enough?
fine, that's fine. Just didn't-
you to take another vote.
Okay. So do we have another motion on the table? Mr. Kelly?
I make a motion that we do not recommend this amendment.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Renlet? Any discussion? Okay, just to make it clear, if you vote aye, then we are not recommending passage of this proposed zoning amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay.
Aye.
5 to 1. That brings us to the third. And I will read it. Okay, the part that we are going to change is an addition at the bottom of this paragraph. So it is hereby established that the environmentally sensitive zone be created to include all land within 500 feet as measured horizontally from the edge of the normal river channels of the Baker and Peninsula rivers and the mean high water line of Loon Lake. The part to add, except that the environmentally sensitive zone shall not extend south of the Tenny Mountain Highway between Yetton Road and Highland Street. Any discussion? Mr. Kelly?
That means that the sensitive zone is not to be enlarged. It merely means a reduction of that particular zone on the south side of the Tenny Mountain Highway.
If I could speak to the clarification, the south side of Tenny Mountain Highway in 2 small portions, as you'll see on that map,
Right.
is already included. So it's not, it's simply to pull that line back
That's what I'm saying.
across to the
That's
north.
what I'm saying.
Right, but it's
To eliminate that part on the south side of Tenny Mountain Highway to be included in the environmental sensitive zone.
not
To be removed. I'm taking to be removed. Mr. Wilson?
Just a question for clarification. Approximately how many acres are involved? You said we've referred to 2 small portions of property.
15.
I'm guessing it looked like a couple acres at the most, huh? Maybe
I've got
less.
to go look at the map.
That's- Okay.
No,
I'm not looking for precision.
No, no, no.
Under 5,
Yes.
more than 10?
yes, they're
Under
just
5 acres.
little snippets.
Any discussion?
I mean, I think this, as has already really actually been stated, I mean, this expands property rights within this area that's going to be removed from the environmentally sensitive zone. I don't have any problem with this one.
Any other discussion? Mr. Renlet?
Yes, I have a question on the first reading of 710-1, which was a different petition. You know, we were talking about putting the master plan and natural resources and aesthetic features, and it included everything on the Baker. And I'm looking at this other one, and it is essentially the same. It drops out the master plan, but it exempts certain area under 5 acres for Yetton Road, between Yetton Road and Highland Street. And I don't know whether anybody here that signed that could expand on why the exception, why is the exception necessary? I mean, we're not recommending passage of the first item, but I'm just wondering what the intent was or what the reason was, if there are any. I don't know whether it's appropriate to
If someone could briefly state in about 20 seconds, 30 seconds, what the reasoning was behind just exempting those two little small portions.
There's like a half-moon area in a couple of areas. Not very deep.
Yep.
But if one was going to develop those pieces of land north of the mountain highway, one would have to add fill or excavate in order to develop those lots. And therefore, it didn't make sense for such a small area to have them included in the environmental assessment zone when really looking at the south side, the north side of the Tenny Mountain Highway is what's protected.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Did I do a good job?
Yes, you did.
I see the, unless there's other discussion, I'll talk. Yes, Mr. Wilson.
I just wanted to make the point that we've had our votes now on whether we recommend passage of the other two petitioned amendments, but these still need to go before the town. And it is entirely possible the town might vote in favor of these amendments. Now, if that were the case, if the town does vote in favor of these amendments, then I think that this last one that we're talking about becomes a very important one for the sake of the property owners of those two slices of land that are south of Tenny Mountain Highway.
Mr. Kelly.
I feel as though if you are going to control a major amount of people owning land along the Baker River, then you should have the same consideration for the people on the south side of the Tenny Mountain Highway. If it's the old adage of what is good for the goose is good for the gander, sort of comes along with this. So if you are going to penalize the people that probably won't affect the Baker River at all, if you're going to penalize them, why allow developers on the other side to have the benefit of this vote?
Mr. Wilson brought up a very good point. Mr. Kelly brought up a very good point. And any other discussion before we go? I'd throw in my 2 cents that a lot of points were brought up that we need to protect as much of the aquifer and the water going through and the impediments, but yet they want to pull out a couple of small pieces. I'm not sure who owns them, but I'd say that I'm not seeing the necessity at this time. If they come in front of the board down the road, and I think common sense would prevail. If someone came owning one of those lots and one of their 20 acres was involved, I would think something could be worked around it, I would hope. But if there's no other discussion, I think we're ready for a vote. Mr. Kelly.
Would you please clarify what way you're voting on?
Well, we haven't got a motion yet. It's gone either way, the way we voted so far tonight. Depending on the motion, I will clarify it after the motion is made.
I'll try to make a motion.
Okay.
I make a motion that we are not in favor of
Not support.
this amendment. Of what?
For the planning board not to support.
Not to recommend support of this amendment.
Not to support.
Not to support.
Okay.
And I do that with the clarification of the amendment saying that they will eliminate the 2 pieces of property on the south side of Tenny Mountain Highway from being in the environmental sensitive zone, right?
I don't know. Sharon says yes, it's late. Yes,
Okay.
yes. So the motion is that we not recommend, the planning board not recommend passage of this proposed zoning amendment. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Ranlett. Any discussion before we vote? To clarify, by saying aye, the board not recommend support for this third proposed proposed amendment. All those in favor of Mr. Kelly's motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay.
Nay.
So that was 4-2. Okay. That brings us forward in the agenda to
That's the end of the public hearing and votes, recommendations on petition warrant articles. We have a couple of items for the board themselves, where we have the opportunity, you have the opportunity to continue this public hearing to a date certain, which was already advertised.
to continue to talk about warrant articles that were brought forth by the town.
Zoning changes
Zoning
that
changes.
that were brought forth by this board.
By this board. Do we want to continue on? Is this board in favor, or do we want to?
By that, what you're saying is we could revisit these?
Well, the reason why it'd be beneficial to talk about it now is because if we have the ability.
You might want to gavel.
We'll give 30 seconds for anybody that has to leave can then leave and finish the conversations outside the room.
Letting us talk this time.
Never had a chili before.
Oh, no, I know.
The reason why why we should possibly talk about these proposed zoning amendments is that if we make any major changes, we have the ability to make a change and then have another public hearing on another day. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Radigan.
Thank you. You guys. Thank you very much. Call me downstairs. Good night. Good night.
Steve?
So we could have a public hearing now. If we decide to make any changes to these proposed warrant articles, we could, and then still have time for another public hearing and make that date today before we leave, if need be. So I think it might be beneficial to continue and have another public hearing.
On what?
On
We've already voted on this.
No,
right?
this is totally different. That was the people's business by petition, citizen petition warrant article. The board, I believe it was on a January 3rd meeting, and prior to, we had a couple of items that had been tossed around for discussion for zoning change by the board itself. The board, by its own volition, or through me, or through Mr. Murphy, the zoning officer, has an opportunity to come up with proposed changes to the zoning. So I have a piece of paper here that speaks to the two items that we heard. So,
Just for clarification.
Sure.
Does it have anything to do with the?
absolutely not,
Okay.
totally done.
Remember we talked about the LED lights?
Yeah, that's what I
That was
remember.
one other-
So if this helps you make a decision on whether or not you want to continue your meeting to a date certain, which has been advertised for February 4th, or do it tonight, that should help.
Let's do it tonight.
So Sharon, I'm going to let you
Sure.
take the lead, and then we'll decide
Brian
whether...
was here. We have two items here. We have, first of all, the first item, which is a definition addition to our terms defined in the zoning ordinance. It would be the word campus. Brian and I have dealt with this several times in terms of site plans for larger facilities such as the Plymouth House. Oh, there's Brian Murphy right there. Brian?
Yes.
Okay. I'm just going over these so you can add it, starting on campus. Campus, this is a proposed new definition for the word campus. Any residential or commercial development with one overall use set among a number of buildings. This definition shall be applied where a question of main accessory use arises. Example, a garage is clearly an accessory use to a residence, but in a, quote, summer camp, end quote, setting, the sleeping quarters, recreation hall, and dining hall, where each building could form a standalone use, comprise its campus. I don't know if Brian wants to speak to it.
And background on this, it came up twice in the last year, one with the Plymouth House, the former Normal Hotel property. they're a treatment guidance center, and other buildings have a specific function, but they're spread out over many, many acres. So the question came up when they wanted to put one up is, what is it? You know, is it accessory? Is it a primary use? The zoning ordinance says one main structure per lot, without going any further as to what main actually means. Those of us with homes with detached garages know exactly what it means. But, you know, for purposes of clarification. And the other one that came up was a residential development on 800 some acres where they wanted to have, and they set it up like a camp. They had a main hall with the shower rooms and cooking facilities and all that, and various sleeping cabins scattered about.
Not a commercial, it wasn't
No, it's
non-commercial.
not commercial at all. It's, as a matter of fact, included in the special exception that they needed for the number of outbuildings, which was one of the things that prompted this. They had to record with the county and also with the conditions for the special exception that it would remain in the family, there'd be no rental. You know, there's protections that we can put around these types of uses. So somebody couldn't say, you know, I'm Mark Gayhart and I'm going to put a building here and put a building there and put a building there, and they're all going to be named because I'm a campus. Well, you're really not. You know what I'm saying? So, and that's why I included that idea that these things are fairly traditional in certain forms. Obviously, our neighbors across the street fit campus to a T, but it's not restricted to education. It could be for research or, like I said, domestic living situations or some forms of like a retreat center, for example, would have many, many different single-purpose buildings. Looked at individually, they could comprise a whole, but the spirit of what they're doing means that they're all bound together as one. So that would just be a way, that doesn't grant them anything by calling it that. It's just a little clearer for the people who have to administer it, myself and Sharon, you guys, and the ZBA, to know what the campus is.
Yes, Mr. Wilson.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. Under this definition, would Hatch Plaza be a campus?
No, that would be a development.
And what about the big medical building at Boulder Point? That all has a...
They call themselves a campus, and essentially they are, but see, they're all housed in one particular, one building. And that's true also, Paul, with Hatch Plaza. There's only one break in that. You have Marshalls, there's a pass-through, right, and the rest is a big L shape. So it's close but no cigar, you know what I'm saying? But there again, it's at use. And we only wanted people to recognize that there may be a third form of development. We have, you know, your single use, you have multi-use. And, you know, it's a very telling question that you asked about Hatch Plaza, because with this as to what campus is, it would allow the board to determine whether it fits under that or not. In that particular case, unfortunately, it doesn't, because both of those citations are single buildings or linked buildings. But it's very similar to what they're doing there, except as individuals. And, you know, it wouldn't apply to a strip mall situation. Okay, the underlying use is business, but there's many players and they're providing different services. It's the linkage of the use that gets it in that proximity.
And just to continue with that thinking, what about at the hospital, at Spear Hospital? There's the main building, and then there's a new building that's been put up nearby, which houses a number of, I understand, a number of doctors' offices. Would that be considered a campus then?
If it was owned by a single person with over, you know, it was all one. As far as I can tell, Paul, you have Spear Memorial. There's the pediatrics are across the street. They also have some single-family homes that they use for visiting doctors and the like. Those would not be included in that because they aren't linked under the umbrella of Spear Memorial, even though And the use of Spirit Memorial, see, you're looking at it actually with two lenses on. One is the ownership, the other is the overarching use. So the single-family homes are clearly residents, even though they're administered by Spirit. And they are remote and discrete pieces of property. I think the one thing that might be missing on this would be that it's all contained on a single parcel. Or, but that runs into premises thing. So if we say parcel, even if you have two together, you'd have to look at them as individual parcels and not as the premises, which would be the whole thing. But it's mostly there just to get the idea in for guidance that it's not all black and white.
Just a couple comments. While I understand the drive to maybe make some amendments here, I really feel like we're trying to shoehorn some amendments into an exceedingly short period of time without having, sort of broad-based discussion, maybe some plans in front of us to really look and analyze. I have a fairly high level of discomfort with this at this point in time, given the short time frame that we have to work with. On the campus, sort of focusing on the campus discussion, I can see it being a commercial, a summer camp is a commercial development. It has residential components, but it is a summer camp. I would be very much opposed to opening the door for a residential campus, because I think that's going to lead to, in some unbeknownst fashion, it's going to lead to someone backdooring a subdivision or some kind of a larger residential community without the benefit of having, a subdivision road created, or adequate access, or frontage, or various things. I think putting some restrictions on ownership may get you to where I would be more comfortable, but without some more specific, stronger language, I would be opposed to this.
If I may, this doesn't at all intend to take anything else off the table. It's just one more definition among many. If you were to put up a residential development of more than one building on a lot, you're going to have to go to the ZBA. So right away you have protection that's already in place. But when you're trying to explain to the ZBA what you're accomplishing here and why you would be willing to sign away some rights, basically, is that you're operating under the aegis of a campus and not as Manny, Mo, and Jack in 3 different homes. Manny, Mo, and Jack, if they were all Lewis's and you were living on the property, yes, because it's a family development with strict, well, I can't say strict because who knows what they're going to put on there, but it will have conditions attached to the use. If they come in under the, say, we're going to build a campus, they still have to get through the ZBA to get the SC to get more than one main structure or variance, whichever it is. But it kind of gives a little bit of guidance to the ZBA or the planning board when you're looking at these things to see the big picture.
Yeah, I don't dispute that. I think there are some potential development that could benefit from this definition, and I think the town would benefit and they would benefit. I guess I'd just rather see a little bit more broad-based discussion and some examples. And is the definition you're proposing this entire paragraph, or is it just?
Yes, including the examples, just in order to give you an idea of how it differs. You bear that in mind when you're looking at it as, and it says right there, shall be applied where a main accessory use comes out. So.
I guess I would have some issues with that kind of language in a definition in the zoning ordinance, because who's going to determine when the question arises? I think it's just, to me, it's just a little bit too imprecise.
Mr. Kelly?
Just a question, and probably I'll be ridiculed when I ask this for the ignorance I'm going to show. But does this have anything or any advantage to anybody creating a non-profit organization through a campus?
No. No. because they would still need to apply through the ZBA, through the planning board for the development. But by saying that you're a campus, this is a campus development, and you may or may not say, you know, add a barn or add this or that or the other, just to give the whole overarching idea. You know, I kind of agree that it's a squishy one. Just the fact that it came up twice to the ZBA and from questions from board members made us wonder if maybe we're missing a little bit of guidance in the ordinance as far as how to treat something, because we all know that these things are out there, you know, and it just was like the first time we really recognized what it is in Plymouth, and that had to do with the development at the 12th house, the Plymouth house right.
I respect your knowledge, but do you think that legal counsel would benefit you and the board?
Why do you think I kicked him out? It was not put by him. This is one of those amendments which would probably require 2 public hearings. You know, you thought it was okay as it is, but I'm hearing now that it needs to be honed. If you know how you deal with it is the board's prerogative.
We have found our hand in the cookie jar too many times that it cost us a lot of legal money, and I've got to stop it before and after.
Right. As I said, the fact that there are certain safeguards in place, Sharon and me initially, and then the boards, you know, secondarily.
But you see, my big problem is whether it's the board or you.
It would not appear in the table of uses.
But what I'm saying is none of this, the only time that you can find that for the period of time that something is lawful or unlawful is after a court decides in that particular time. Courts can be overturned, but at that particular time. So if we think we know, or we know, then there's, you know, there is no defined answer to that point. I go back to my old accounting practice, and it says no income tax is accepted until you go through an audit. Once you go through an audit, then that's it. Same idea with the courts. If you go back through the courts and they say one way or the other, then that's law for that particular moment. But we could discuss it all day long, and we could read the law all day long and interpret it the wrong way. So I just want to be careful of that.
Yes.
Any other questions? Yes, Mr.
I mean, from what I'm hearing, and I have a tendency to agree that, you know, rather than try to rush these through, to spend more time with them during the year, and, you know, if they are beneficial and we need to address them, you know, to do so next year, rather than try to push them through now.
Mr. Wilson.
If that is the case, if we decide to table it, I'd just like to ask Mr. Murphy if he could explain paragraph, which is number 2 on the handout, about the LED.
They were actually 2 separate things. These
Right,
we
so-
handled.
so-
Yeah.
1 and 2.
Right, so I think we need to
Let's finish on one.
Take care of this one, yeah.
Will item number 1 have to show up as a warrant article?
No.
So
Kill it right here.
we could kill it right here if we wanted to. So I don't know if,
I make a motion that we kill it right here.
I like the word.
It's
I make a motion that further study be done in regards to this particular.
okay, further study over the
I wanna
course
talk.
of the next year.
I don't know how.
Okay. Is there a second? Mr. Ranlett. So if we vote in the affirmative, or if you vote in the affirmative, it's to basically table this and continue to look at it over the course of the next 12 months. All those, any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay? None. 6 to 0. Okay, that brings us to item number 2.
I think that you started this one, staying. Right. And I was traveling the other night, several weeks ago, and I noticed that those two signs, and unfortunately neither of them reside here in town. Right. They do appear to be bright. But also I noticed that one is noticeably brighter than the other. So I went to both of those establishments to see if anybody there could help me. And I knew I was doomed from the start because, you know, corporate is here and the store is over here. And we were running out of time, Paul. So it's not that we didn't want to give it a lot of thought, but I just wanted to say that, yes, I tried to get that information. It probably can be gotten, but not in the short time frame that we have. But also that if we're going to do something like this, and my recommendation here is that you assign hard numbers to what intense is. Because it already says intense lighting in the sign ordinance, and that one is in the eye of the beholder. And to be perfectly honest, with the lighting technology that's out today, some people think that the blue LED Christmas lights, which glow almost purple, are intensely lit. They bother their eyes. But, you know, it's not luminosity so much as probably hue. So if we get away from perceptions, then we can say, you know, this but not this. And that was all I was trying to get to.
I agree, and I think it would be helpful if we could bring in Ray Gosney and the committee that put together and enacted this action to install LED lighting as street lighting, because they made a lot of observations, and he showed us a PowerPoint presentation that talked about light intensity at the ground level because of LED, switching over to LED street lighting from what we currently have or had. So I think that he might be in a position to, or that committee might be in a position to recommend some light intensity values. I think the observation that you made is one that any reasonable person would make when you pass by. There's no need for us in the public meeting here to mention those two businesses, but they have similar kinds of lighting, but one is far more intense than the other. And because of the nature of LED lighting and that it's aimed horizontally, it's aimed right into the driver's eyes, and at nighttime it can be pretty distracting.
Right. The street lighting has the benefit of being able to point directly at the ground.
Right.
Right. You know, but you're correct. If there was some way to mitigate the glare to the driver's eyes from those, it would be the way to go.
Mr. Kelly.
If this is a safety issue, and if the two places of business are not in Plymouth, would it be beneficial for this planning board to invite the neighboring town's planning board to have a joint meeting and see if we could do it sort of in a regional type of basis? Plymouth has been for a better word, whacked too many times and not getting any benefit from a certain various different enterprises that have gone on here, namely the Wind Tower and namely Northern Pass and everything. We have been basically hurt as far as tourism or anything like that is concerned, and we can't do anything about it. And I think I would like to suggest, while we're going through this process, that we try to get other towns to enact the same ordinance as what we have.
It's certainly, you know, an idea. I'd just like to make the observation that there are a lot of commercial development outside of the road on 175.
I would really like to see us, we can't answer this today. We need some outside information, and if it's...
Just as an addendum, if you will recall, you have offered an invitation to the towns of Bridgewater and Hebron for our work session on whenever that February Thursday is.
3rd.
Oh.
And
The
there's
next
fifth.
work
And there's the
session,
fifth,
they're
yeah.
going to be coming to have just a regional chat about
Actually,
things.
other than visual part of it, Bridgewater and Hebron have very little effect on Plymouth.
Oh, no, not as it relates.
I'm not even talking about this, but they have very little effect. Hebron's sitting over there, they might have a little bit.
Well, they wanted to come to talk to us.
But I think we should also invite the surrounding towns and try to get it more as a district type thing if it affects Plymouth in any way. But to get back to this, I make a motion that we do further study on this particular amendment.
Is there a second? Mr. Ranlat, so any discussion?
Yes,
Mr.
I
Wilson?
have something too.
Yeah.
No, well, you can go first. Go ahead, Mr. Wilson.
Sorry, I'm not looking that way.
That's okay. You both go first.
Yeah, this started out when I found an article in the newspaper. It's actually a couple of years old now, that I scanned. It was in the statewide newspaper that I scanned and I sent to Ms. Penny, which talked about some towns in southern New Hampshire enacting sign ordinances that forbade LED lighting for advertising signs for commercial enterprises, and or forbade LED lighting for any purpose. So I think that if those things have been enacted in other towns, we could get a copy. If we could get a copy from those towns of what their ordinances look like, they may very well give us some benchmarks about light intensity so that they can be as specific as you'd like to see, as we'd all like to see.
Interesting. Mr. Roach?
I agree with Mr. Wilson that the light is distracting at night, LED lightings. LEDs are measured in lumens, that's the technological term for it. And every LED has a luminosity measured in lumens. It also has a wavelength, and some wavelengths are more annoying than others. If you ever notice when the state police is on the side of 93, you can see the blue lights for miles because blue carries a much longer distance than red does. That's the reason why blue is used on airport lights. The planes can see the runways from way up in the air. The blue light travels further. So I think we probably could get something that you said from other towns. Also, I wouldn't be surprised if the DOT has some regulations, because if it's a safety hazard on a street, a main road, 175A is a state road. Route 3 through Plymouth is a state road too.
Yeah,
So
I would think that there would be
I think
some
the
sort
DOT may
of-
already have something as far as
They've
lumens
gone
and
home by
wavelengths
that
that's
point or
acceptable.
something, but it's...
So if the state has something, other towns have something, we could just kind of piggyback on that.
So it sounds like we want to bring this to another meeting, so that
Just
it
a
could...
regular work session.
a regular-
I mean, well, what are we doing here? Use
To
further
try
study. That
and
means-
get it for the warrant article for this year, or we...
That's not what I heard.
Okay.
Well, in the motion, but I could be wrong.
It sounds like we want to get more specific with this. Either, yes, you can use it, or you can't use it, or if you can, we need to have some sort of quantity.
It's kind of standard.
So I'm not sure whether the timeline we can try and get this in for another hearing this year, or is the board more thinking study it over the next?
The intent of including it on there was as a heads up. I figured, if you're really hot to trot, and we had some numbers, but we don't, we could have gotten it with the second public hearing. The definition one was about as clean as we could get it at this point without input from others. That was the only one that had the possibility of getting on the ballot this year. I had no hope for number 2, but I just wanted to let you know why we didn't have hope.
Okay. So I guess a motion similar.
You still have a motion on the floor?
Oh, yes. A motion to
Table it for a
Recommend
while.
table for further study.
for further study. We have a second by Mr. Renlat. Any more discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Seeing none. All right. That.
Okay, well, we want to make public notice for the record about the viability of the next meeting, since we have nothing to discuss. Next zoning amendment public hearing.
We have none, correct? As I see
No,
it.
this was it.
This was it. So we have no further hearings scheduled. We did have a date set aside if need be, but do we need a motion or we
To
do?
cancel it, yeah, because it's out there in public notice.
So we need a motion to cancel.
With the, excuse me, but with the caveat that the board reserves the right to continue to that date certain or cancel it. So you need to officially cancel it.
Okay.
I'd make a motion to cancel.
A second?
Second.
Any discussion? Second by
Pat?
Mr. Roach. If no discussion, then all those in favor of canceling the second public hearing that was set aside for February 4th signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay? Seeing none, 6-0. Cancel it. That brings us to, did we talk about correspondence, or we want to just go right to...
No, I don't have any correspondence.
Been a long night. I'm going to open up very quick. Yes.
Oh, I might have to go out there and sit in the seats for public, but I was talking to the owners of Plymouth Furniture, and they are very, very concerned about the activities of the building. I know that the university doesn't have to abide by any laws or rules or regulations of Plymouth, but they are very concerned as far as how close they are coming to their building, because they have an alleyway, and they were quite specific one night about being able to go down to their secondary warehouse or their warehouse and pick up an item. I went by, which we should always do. We should always go to a lot inspection, but we don't. But anyway, I went by, and that chain link fence is leaned right up against the building. Now, it might be that they're going to come back and say, well, that's only while we are in construction. But I have seen in my shop life that people seem to invade space if nobody's really looking at it. So I certainly would like to have Brian or somebody to go along and make sure the fence isn't leaning against the building, and make sure they have some posts up in there so that there's a defined border to where their property begins and ends.
Okay. I've been keeping my finger on the pulse of what's happening at 149. There is a right-of-way that runs down that alley.
That's right.
The reason that the fence doesn't go all the way to the building, one is so it doesn't scar the building, the other is to allow the Plymouth Furniture folks to get down.
Right, but that, I went by it last Sunday, and that fence is leaning like that, and the building is like that. You couldn't put a motorcycle down through there.
It's mostly for protection of the workers and the people that work around it.
But we also have to have protection of the Plymouth Furniture people.
Plymouth Furniture knows very well exactly where their boundary line is.
I
And they've been in
understand
contact
that,
with
but does the other new people know where the boundary line is?
the site supervisor, who is my contact at that job, knows exactly where it is. He explained to me why he did that. A lot of what they're doing is trying to keep OSHA from jumping all over them. That's why they have that Jersey barrier at the corner, where there's all the, I mean, the guys that are working on the Main Street side, within the fence, have to wear fall protection because it's over 6 feet to the bottom of that hole.
Good for them.
Yeah, but see, you know, they're satisfying many masters. I haven't spoken to Jim since some of our earlier meetings from Plymouth Furniture. But they all recognize that that alley has to remain in some form or another, because it's recorded in the deed.
I guess what I'm worried about is if all of this is acknowledged, then they wouldn't have stopped me from going out of the restaurant and saying, John, I have a problem. So if everybody else is happy with it, then at least somebody should be good neighbors and say, you know, we realize that, we realize what the boundary is, we aren't all of a sudden going to put a little bit more of a foundation. Hey, I've done this before myself, so I'm not very knowledgeable. I've done a lot of these things myself and got away with it. So, not exactly like that. But I found that, you know, you can cut a tree on the opposite side of the stone wall, and if nobody sees it, then everybody's happy. I just don't want that building to be put up and then have Dave come to me in the Western and say, hey, you know,
I was in the basement with some mattresses that they poured to support the new foundation along that side, and they were pretty much right up against the alley on the south side.
And we can still talk about this outside of the meeting.
Okay.
So, all right, let's, I'm going to allow a very brief public comment. I know there's been some people waiting. If you have something you'd like to say, I would allow it very briefly, not having anything to do with anything on the agenda tonight.
Okay, this is Frank Miller's respect of the lighting for signs and stuff. Having been with that project of the Main Street signage and lighting and what we were attempting to do back the last century, first, the technology of lighting has changed from our ordinance. We have included wording of a direct internally lit signs like fluorescence. But then we put up our verbiage in a sign ordinance to put externally lights, but then we come along with this dark sky philosophy of not having unnecessary lights going up. And obviously, we need to rethink that. Plus, the Main Street business community is embracing the new technology. I know Chase Street Market is indirect lighting with LED. So in other words, you're not seeing the direct light bulb, but you're seeing reflected light. And second, as a result of our restrictive elements of our use of signage and lighting, the majority of the business owners moved all their LED lighting signs inside, which then you have no recourse of law as a planning board. So what we have is an old ordinance, and we have new technology, and I definitely applaud the revisit of what we can do with respect to the new technology in our upgraded ordinance.
Anyone else? Yes, Mr. Wilson.
I figured I was already here, I'd stick around. And while I had everyone's attention, so some of you might be aware, Sharon worked with me to try to put an offer forward to the planning board. And so I figured I would just mention this to you so you all know what it entailed. So my primary work is as a planning consultant here in New Hampshire, working with boards just like this on master planning and on zoning. And one of the observations we made years ago, 8-9 years ago, is that it's very common for a town to work really hard on their master plan and be thoroughly exhausted or not have the political will to go forward and implement it. My observation without any analysis is that we fall in the same trap as most New Hampshire communities, and in that we have a solid master plan that was adopted by the planning board, but we haven't actually carried forward with the discussion. Not all of those things necessarily will be implemented the way that they were put forward in the master plan, but the discussion for how we can interpret that and how we can make changes. And I think tonight's discussion, you know, highlights that point, that there are still some unresolved issues within the community, and we need time to work with citizens and with planning board in a collaborative way before the time crunch. So all I had extended, and unfortunately it wasn't allowed to be made as a decision at this level, it was elevated to the Board of Selectmen level, where they decided to deny my offer, which was to I have 5 advanced planning students who would really benefit from this kind of interaction, for seeing, you know, the responsibilities of the planning board to the population, and to be able to take your feedback with issues that you know you're dealing with within the regulations, and spend some time analyzing the master plan and the regulations and saying, wow, you said you wanted to go here in the master plan, but your zoning ordinance hasn't caught up, and here are the places where it hasn't caught up. And we call it a regulatory audit. So I just wanted to let you know that that had been offered. That offer was denied because at some point in the past I have expressed an opinion about something in town, as most of us have, and it's unfortunate. And at some point I mentioned in the Board of Selectmen meeting that I'm likely to do this exercise anyway, because it's valuable to the students to actually get to understand how master plans are written and how zoning regulations work and where they mesh and where they don't. But without this engagement, without the back and forth, it doesn't serve any use for the planning board. You're not invested in the process. You don't see how they created it, and you don't have it as a working document moving forward. And I guess I just wanted to leave on the table, I think it's something that we could do in the future, either collaboratively, with a committee or with students. This is another place where we can get some value added, from the university. So I just put that out there. If there ever proves to be a time that you think it's appropriate and you want to look at the master plan and look at the land use regulations and kind of put together a work plan, I'd be happy to be part of that conversation. So.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Houle.
I just want to make a general comment as it relates to amendments to zoning regs or planning regulations. And for the benefit of some of you that may or may not know, I'm saying this against the backdrop of some 15 years of planning board involvement, not only in this town, but in the previous town that I came from. To convince the public to accept a change or a new zoning provision or planning regulation provision, the public can only accept things in little pieces. And when it comes to the board's responsibility of going through the process of deciding what changes are warranted either by new technology or by changing circumstance within the community or whatever motivates you, you want to take the time to vet that change very, very thoroughly as a board and then through your town council. Because while you may be best intentioned in what you're trying to accomplish, more often than not, the unintended consequences will come back to bite you where you don't want it. And every word has to be examined, and you were spot on tonight, Mike, in the word that you picked up in one of the proposed amendments. How do you interpret that word in meaning as a private individual, through Webster, through legal, or any other means of interpreting that in and of itself or in the greater context? And it's your board responsibility and the zoning board as well to give any consideration for change or addition very, very careful examination and then very thorough review by your council so that you're not obligating the town to challenges and lots of unnecessary court expense. Thank you. I think you did a good job tonight.
Thank you. Is there a motion?
What's the motion about?
I don't know.
Make a motion to adjourn. I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Oh, wait, is there?
Oh.
No. Okay.
I would like to just make one mention. As Mr. Houle said, in regards to the planning, as far as the master plan, I believe, and I think he'll agree with me, that it is a living instrument and it has to be changed all the time. And I also know that our mission is to initiate a master plan and to amend it at any time that it feels as it being necessary. 10 years ago, I was with, whenever it was, with Mr. Houle, and in that committee, I was on part of that. And after that, they took it and they threw it into the closet and said, well, we're all through with that. I have been, in the last few years, been trying to get the board to sit down and take at least one meeting and talk about the master plan and what it really means, and also Tenny Mountain. This has not been done.
Just to follow up on John's comment, the master plan is a guiding document. It's not a regulation, it's not law. And as such, it should be reviewed and updated on a regular basis. And people can agree to disagree on a lot of its content, but whatever ultimately the plurality decides upon, that becomes a guide. But emphasize God, it's nothing more than that.
All right. Motion out there. Mr. Wilson?
I move that we adjourn.
Second? Second by Mr. Kelly. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Great. We're out of here.